David Adderwale stood at the gate of the NYSC orientation camp in Anambra State, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a sense of anticipation bubbling in his chest. The camp was bustling with energy. New graduates from all over Nigeria milled about, some chatting excitedly, others looking lost as they tried to find their registration points. "Welcome to NYSC," a cheerful marshal shouted, ushering David and a group of other young men and women toward the registration hall. David smiled, grateful for the enthusiasm. After years of studying English at the University of Lagos, he was ready for a change of scenery and an adventure. Being posted to Anambra was an opportunity to immerse himself in the eastern part of the country, a place he had only read about in books or seen in movies. As he waited in line to register, his eyes fell on a very beautiful tall lady standing in front of him, and he struck up a conversation with her. "Hi, I'm David," he said, extending a hand. The lady turned and shook it warmly. "Nice to meet you, David. I'm Amanda. You're from Lagos, right? I can tell by your accent." David chuckled, guilty as charged. "You? From Enugu. It's not too far from here. I hear this camp is strict, but the food isn't bad," Amanda said with a grin. The two continued chatting as they moved through the registration process, sharing their excitement and mild apprehension about the weeks ahead. The orientation camp turned out to be a whirlwind of activities. Days began at dawn with the blaring sound of a bugle, summoning everyone to the parade ground. David quickly learned to march in sync, shout the NYSC anthem with gusto, and endure long hours under the scorching sun. It wasn't all hard work, though. There were lectures on national unity, sessions on entrepreneurship, and cultural orientation classes that David found particularly fascinating. It was during one of these sessions that he first heard about Uli, the village where he would later be posted. A stern-looking woman named Mrs. Okafor stood at the front of the hall, addressing the corps members. "Anambra is a state rich in culture and tradition. Many of you will be posted to remote villages where these traditions are still deeply respected. It is important to understand and adapt to these customs." She paced the room, her voice rising slightly for emphasis. "Take Uli, for example. It is a beautiful village. But one thing you must know is that the people there revere snakes. They believe snakes are sacred emissaries of Ezinwanyi, the snake goddess. Killing a snake in Uli is seen as a grave offense, and the consequences," she paused, her eyes scanning the room, "can be severe." David leaned forward in his seat, intrigued. A hand shot up from the back of the hall. "Excuse me, Ma, what kind of consequences are we talking about?" Mrs. Okafor's expression darkened. "Curses, illness, sometimes death. It's not superstition to them, it's their reality. So my advice to you is simple. Respect the traditions of wherever you are posted." Amanda leaned forward towards David, whispering, "Snakes? That's unsettling." David smiled. "It's fascinating. Imagine living in a place where snakes are seen as protectors. There's so much history and mystery in that." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "You're oddly enthusiastic about snakes, David. Just don't go adopting one as a pet." He laughed. "Don't worry, I'll stick to respecting them from a distance." As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. They shared secrets, dreams, and stories about their families. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, they sat in one of the shops in the popular Mami market, sharing a meal together. "You know, I've never quite met anyone like you, Amanda. I hope we get posted to the same place so we can explore further where this could lead," David said. Amanda smiled and said, "Me too, but I guess time will tell." 3 weeks passed in a blur. By the end of the orientation, David felt more prepared and even more curious about the adventure ahead. On the final day of camp, David and Amanda received their deployment letters. Amanda was posted to a town in Agwata, while David was sent to Uli. "I guess this is where the adventure splits," Amanda said, trying to keep her voice steady as they stood outside the camp gate. David took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not the end, Amanda. Just a pause. We'll keep in touch, and who knows, maybe fate will bring us back together." Amanda nodded, blinking back tears. "You better not forget me, David Adderwale." He smiled. "How could I? You're unforgettable, Amanda." They hugged tightly, neither wanting to let go, before reluctantly heading to their respective buses. The journey from the camp to the village was long, winding through dusty roads and lush green fields. As the bus approached the village, David stared out the window, taking in the sights. Uli was nothing like Lagos. It was quieter, more serene, and seemed untouched by the chaos of city life. As he alighted, his heart pounded with excitement as the NYSC bus dropped him off at the village square. The setting sun cast a golden hue over the small cluster of houses, and children ran barefoot, their laughter echoing in the quiet air. Elders sat under a large Iroko tree, speaking in Igbo, their eyes occasionally darting curiously at the new arrival. "Good evening," David greeted with a warm smile, clutching his small suitcase. "I'm David Adewale, the new corps member." A middle-aged man approached, his face lighting up in recognition. "Ah, you are welcome, my son. I am Chief Okiki, the head of the village council. Come, let us take you to your lodge." David followed Chief Okiki through narrow paths, the rich, earthy scent of the land filling his lungs. His lodge was a simple but clean one-room structure with a thatched roof. A mosquito net hung over the bed, and a kerosene lamp sat on the wooden table. "This is your home for the next year," Chief Okiki said proudly. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Chief," David replied, setting down his suitcase. "I already feel at home here." The chief nodded, his expression turning serious. "One thing, my son. You must remember what they taught you during orientation. The snakes here are sacred. They will not harm you, but you must not harm them either. Eze Nwanyi, the snake goddess, watches over them. Do not anger her." David chuckled nervously. "I understand, Chief. I'll respect the traditions." Satisfied, Chief Okiki left, leaving David to settle in. The next morning, David woke to the sound of drums and a rooster crowing. It was his first day at the secondary school, and he dressed quickly in his NYSC khaki, eager to make a good impression. The school was a modest building with chalkboard walls and wooden desks. "Good morning, class," David greeted, stepping into a classroom filled with wide-eyed teenagers. "Good morning, sir," they chorused, standing in unison. David smiled. "You can sit. My name is Mr. Adwell, but you can call me Mr. David. I'll be your English teacher this year." One boy raised his hand shyly. "Sir, where are you from?" "I'm from Lagos," David replied, leaning against the desk. "It's a big city far from here. But I came to Uli because I want to learn about your culture. Maybe you can teach me too." The students laughed, and a girl piped up. "Then you must know about Eze Nwanyi and the snakes." David nodded. "Yes, I've heard about them. Do you all believe in her?" A murmur spread through the class. "Yes, sir," the boy answered. "The snakes protect us. They are our friends." David decided not to press further, but made a mental note to learn more. A few weeks passed, and David began to feel at ease in Uli. He often wandered through the village, greeting the locals and soaking in the vibrant culture. He was beginning to understand the rhythms of life there, the early morning calls of the traders in the market, the communal spirit that filled the air, and the respect the villagers had for their traditions. Though the village was quiet, it was alive with history, and David found himself fascinated by the local customs. He kept in touch with Amanda, and they spoke at every chance they got, sharing their experiences in the communities they had been posted to. Late-night calls, brief texts, and even the occasional video chat kept their connection strong despite the distance. David found himself growing fonder of her, more so with every conversation. He poured out his heart to Amanda, telling her how much he missed her and how he couldn't wait to see her again. "How's life treating you in Uli?" Amanda asked one night during one of their phone calls. "It's amazing, Amanda. The people here are warm, and I'm learning so much. But honestly, it's not the same without you. I keep thinking about how nice it would be to have you here, sharing these moments with me." Amanda chuckled softly. "You're such a romantic, David, but don't get too carried away. It's just a year, remember?" David's voice softened. "I know it's just a year, but you're more than just someone I met in camp. I feel like we've got something real here, Amanda." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Amanda finally spoke, her voice a little more serious. "But I'm not your girl, David. I'm still very single." She said it almost sarcastically, trying to keep the mood light. David's heart skipped a beat. He hesitated for a moment before responding, but when he did, there was a sense of urgency in his tone. "I know, but I've been thinking about it a lot, Amanda. I want to be with you. Even if we've only known each other for a short time, I feel like what we have is special. So will you date me? Will you be my girlfriend?" Amanda was quiet again, and David could hear the faint sound of her breathing through the line. Finally, she spoke, her voice laced with caution. "David, I don't know. Long-distance relationships, they've never worked for me. I've been cheated on before, and I've had enough of that kind of heartbreak." David's heart sank, but he quickly steadied himself. "I understand, Amanda. I really do. But this will be different, I promise. I won't hurt you. I'm not like the others." Amanda sighed. "I want to believe you, David. I really do. But how do we even make this work? We're so far apart, and I've seen how these things fall apart. It's just hard to trust." David's voice was filled with determination. "I get it, but I believe in us. And I believe we can make this work. We can find a way to stay in touch, to connect, even if it's just once or twice a month. Our communities are only a few hours apart. We can plan visits, talk on the phone, text, do whatever it takes. We'll make it work." Amanda was quiet again, and David could sense the conflict in her mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke softly. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "More serious than I've ever been," David replied without hesitation. "You mean something to me, Amanda? I'm not going to give up on us." There was a long pause, and David's heart beat faster as he waited for her response. Finally, Amanda's voice broke the silence. "All right, David, let's give it a try. But I want you to know that I'm not going to make this easy for you. You've got to prove yourself to me, and you'll have to show me that you're serious. No games." David smiled, his heart soaring with happiness. "I swear, Amanda, I'm all in. No games, just us." "Okay," Amanda said, her tone softening. "We'll see how it goes. But if you're really serious, we'll make it work." David could hardly believe his ears. "Thank you, Amanda. I promise you I won't let you down." They ended the call on a hopeful note, both feeling a renewed sense of connection despite the distance between them. David spent the rest of his evening smiling to himself, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He had a mission now, not just to serve his country, but to prove to Amanda that he was the man she deserved. Over the next few months, David and Amanda found ways to stay in touch. They talked on the phone every weekend, catching up on their respective villages and their lives. Occasionally, they sent each other letters, little tokens of affection to keep their bond alive. There were times when they both felt the weight of the distance, moments when a simple hug or a shared smile would have made all the difference. But they persevered, and the emotional connection they shared grew stronger with every passing day. David remained dedicated to his work in Uli, pouring his energy into teaching and bonding with his students. He noticed Linda, one of the brightest students in his class, was always eager to answer questions, often going out of her way to seek his attention. He thought nothing of it at first, dismissing her enthusiasm as that of a bright, inquisitive student. Occasionally, she would slip handwritten notes onto his desk, filled with flowery words about admiration and love. David would smile and dismiss them as childish infatuation, always reminding himself to stay professional. One particularly dry afternoon, David found himself grappling with the lack of water in his lodge. The village had been experiencing a water shortage, and he decided to take his clothes to the nearby river to wash them. The river was serene, surrounded by lush vegetation, and offered a rare moment of solitude for David. As he knelt by the water, scrubbing a shirt, he suddenly felt fingers tickling his sides. Startled, he turned quickly, his hand splashing water as he swiveled around. "Whoa, what the—" he began, but his words trailed off as he stared at the young woman standing before him. She was strikingly beautiful, her skin glowing in the afternoon sun. She wore a short, revealing dress that clung to her curves, and her face was lightly made up, enhancing her delicate features. For a moment, David didn't recognize her. "Sir, don't tell me you've already forgotten me," Linda said with a playful smile, her voice soft and teasing. David squinted at her, confusion giving way to recognition. "Linda? Is that you?" "You look so different," he said, astonished. Linda smirked, twirling a strand of her hair. Yes, I know, right? So, do you like what you see? David was taken aback by her boldness. Before he could respond, Linda continued, stepping closer to him. I guess the reason you haven't been answering my letters is because you only see me as your student. But look around, sir. We're not in the classroom anymore. David felt his pulse quicken as he took in her transformation. She was undeniably beautiful, her confidence radiating in a way he hadn't noticed before. For a brief moment, he found himself captivated, but then Amanda's face flashed in his mind, anchoring him back to reality. You're very beautiful, Linda, he said carefully, trying to keep his tone gentle but firm. But I have a serious girlfriend, you see. I care deeply for her, and I can't betray her trust. I hope you find someone who will truly appreciate you one day. Linda's smile vanished, replaced by a look of hurt and anger. You're rejecting me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. After all those letters, all those hints? You don't feel anything for me? David sighed, standing up from his crouched position by the riverbank. Linda, you're an amazing young woman, but this isn't right. You're my student, and more importantly, my heart is with someone else. Linda glared at him, her cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Without another word, she turned and stormed off, her footsteps crunching on the dry leaves as she disappeared into the woods. David exhaled heavily, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. He crouched back down, resuming his washing and trying to shake off the encounter. The river's gentle flow and the chirping of birds around him began to soothe his nerves. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound behind him. His body tensed, and he turned his head cautiously. His heart nearly stopped when he saw a massive snake with 5 heads just a few feet away, its body coiled and its head raised, staring directly at him. David froze, his mind racing. He quickly reached for a large stick lying nearby, his instincts screaming at him to defend himself. But then, a memory from his orientation camp flashed in his mind. The warning about the sacredness of snakes in Uli. Killing one could bring severe consequences. His grip on the stick loosened as he steadied his breathing, trying to stay as calm as possible. Please go away, he murmured under his breath, unsure if he was speaking to the snake or the gods it supposedly represented. The snake remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, its unblinking eyes fixed on him. David's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground, silently praying for it to leave. Finally, the snake uncoiled and slithered away into the underbrush, its departure as silent as its arrival. David let out a shaky breath and quickly packed up his clothes, his hands trembling slightly. Slinging the wet laundry over his shoulder, he hurried back to his lodge, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to ensure the snake wasn't following him. When he finally reached the safety of his room, he sank onto his bed, replaying the day's events in his mind. Linda's boldness, his brush with the snake. It all felt surreal, as though he had stepped into one of the folk tales he often heard from the villagers. This place, he muttered to himself, is testing me in every way possible. He picked up his phone and dialed Amanda's number, feeling an overwhelming need to hear her voice. When she answered, her warm tone immediately eased his nerves. Hey, Amanda, he said softly. I just needed to hear you. David, are you okay? You sound shaken, she asked, concern evident in her voice. I'm fine, he replied, choosing not to share the full details of his day. Just missing you a lot right now. I miss you too, Boo, Amanda replied, her voice soft and comforting. Guess what? She added, her tone shifting to one of excitement. What? David asked, curiosity piqued. I applied for a few days' break, and I'll be coming to see you next weekend. David's heart leapt with joy. Are you serious? Amanda, that's the best news I've heard all week. I can't wait to see you. Her laughter was like music to his ears. Well, get ready because I'm coming to spoil you for a few days. You have no idea how much I need this right now, David confessed. Amanda's visit couldn't have come at a better time. His encounters with Linda had left him feeling unsettled, and seeing Amanda was the perfect way to reset his focus. In the days leading up to Amanda's visit, David did his best to avoid Linda, but it was easier said than done. She was persistent, leaving provocative letters on his desk at school and occasionally slipping them under his door. Each one was filled with declarations of her feelings and thinly veiled attempts to lure him into sleeping with her. One afternoon, David heard a knock at his door. When he opened it, there was Linda, standing there in an outfit so revealing it made his blood boil with lust, but he managed to control himself. "Linda, what are you doing here?" he asked, keeping his tone firm. "I just came to see you, sir," she said with a sly smile, stepping closer. "I thought maybe we could talk." David sighed, stepping back and blocking the doorway with his body. "Linda, this is inappropriate. You shouldn't be here. Please go home." "But why are you pushing me away?" she asked, her voice laced with hurt. "You're not married, sir. What's wrong with me? Don't you see how much I want you?" David's resolve was tested in that moment. Linda's beauty and confidence were undeniable, and her boldness could have been tempting to anyone. But his mind went straight to Amanda, the woman he loved, who trusted him, and who would be visiting soon. "Linda," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're a bright, beautiful young woman, but this isn't right. You're my student, and I'm in a committed relationship. Please respect that." Her expression shifted, her eyes narrowing. "You think I don't know about your girlfriend? She's not here, David." "I am. She doesn't have to know." David felt a wave of anger rise in him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Linda, leave. Now I won't say it again." She stared at him for a moment, her face a mixture of anger and disappointment. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the dirt path as she left his lodge. David closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. He knew Linda's persistence wouldn't end there, but he was determined not to let her actions derail his integrity or his relationship with Amanda. As the week went on, Linda continued to test him. She would show up at his classroom unannounced, linger too long after lessons, or sit in the front row wearing outfits that were entirely inappropriate for a school setting. David began to dread her presence, but he maintained his professionalism, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. Finally, the weekend of Amanda's visit arrived. David cleaned his lodge thoroughly, preparing it for her arrival. When he saw her stepping out of the village taxi, her smile lighting up the dusty road, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief and happiness. "Amanda!" he called out, running to greet her. "David!" she responded, throwing her arms around him. The hug was warm and grounding, exactly what he needed. For the first time in weeks, David felt like he could breathe again. "I missed you so much," he said, holding her close. "I missed you too," Amanda replied, looking up at him with a smile. "Now tell me everything. How have you been?" David hesitated for a moment, debating whether to tell her about Linda. He decided to focus on the positive for now, not wanting to dampen their reunion. "I'm better now that you're here," David said, leading Amanda towards his lodge. He could already feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting off his shoulders. The weekend they spent together was exactly what he needed. David took Amanda to the historical locations of the village, showing her the ancient artifacts and the old structures that had been preserved for centuries. The village was full of life and culture, and he loved sharing it with her. They walked through the bustling local market, sampled delicious foods, and interacted with the friendly villagers who welcomed Amanda with open arms. But the highlight of the trip was the crystal-clear blue waters near the edge of the village. David had heard about the hidden river, known for its purity and stunning beauty, and he knew it would be the perfect place to relax. Together, they swam and spent the afternoon soaking in the tranquil environment, enjoying the cool breeze and each other's company. For the first time in a long while, David felt truly at peace. The following day, as Amanda prepared to leave, David tried to make the most of their remaining time. He cherished every moment with her, knowing that her visit had brought him back to himself. They made plans to stay in touch, and David promised her that he would come to visit her once he had some free time. Just a day before Amanda was set to leave, their peaceful time together was interrupted. David had just stepped out to fetch some more water when he heard an urgent knock at the door. He recognized Linda's voice as she called out for him, but before he could respond, the door opened, and to his shock, Amanda answered it. Linda stood in the doorway, her eyes flaring with fury when she saw Amanda standing there, a subtle but unmistakable tension in the air. "So you're the unfortunate, miserable thing that stole my heart's desire from me," Linda spat, her tone venomous. Amanda blinked, clearly confused by the hostility in Linda's words. "Excuse me," she asked, taking a step back, unsure of what was happening. Before Amanda could say anything further, David, hearing the commotion, rushed back into the lodge. His face shifted from confusion to anger as he saw Linda standing in the doorway, her eyes still locked on Amanda. "Linda, what are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold. Amanda, now clearly uncomfortable, turned to David. "David, what's going on? Who is this?" David's jaw tightened as he walked over to Amanda and stood protectively beside her. "Linda," he began with a low, firm voice, "you need to leave, right now." Linda, her eyes flashing, ignored David's command and instead turned her gaze to Amanda. "Oh, I see now," she sneered. "You must be the girl who thinks she's won. Well, you haven't. You've just taken what's mine." David stepped forward, his patience running thin. "This has gone too far, Linda. You've been making advances toward me, sending me inappropriate letters, showing up at my home uninvited. This stops now. I'll be reporting everything to the school authorities. I'll hand over the letters you've sent me, and I promise you, I'll make sure you're expelled." Linda didn't flinch at David's threat. Instead, she gave him a disdainful look before turning her gaze back to Amanda. "You think you've won him over, but you will see," she said coldly, her voice laced with malice. "I will deal with you." David's blood began to boil as he stepped between Linda and Amanda. "I don't want to hear any more from you. Leave my house now before I call the village elders." Linda glared at him, but she didn't move. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. For a moment, neither David nor Linda said anything. The silence was suffocating. "I will leave, David," Linda said, her voice low but filled with determination. "But you'll regret this. You haven't seen the last of me." David stood there, his anger simmering, but he didn't respond. He watched as Linda stormed out, her footsteps heavy with defiance. The door slammed behind her, and for a brief moment, silence enveloped the room. Amanda stood frozen, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed. "Who was that, David? And why didn't you ever tell me about this?" she asked, her voice sharp, hurt lacing her words. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's my student, Amanda. She's been sending me letters, but I dismissed them as childish infatuation. I thought if I ignored her advances, she'd eventually back off. But now..." His voice trailed off, realization dawning on him. "I've clearly misjudged the situation. I need to get the school involved in this." Amanda's face softened, though she still looked disappointed. "You should have told me sooner. I don't like being kept in the dark." David stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry, Amanda. I never wanted to hide anything from you. I thought it was harmless, but now I see how serious it's become. I'll handle it. I promise." Amanda hesitated, but nodded reluctantly. "I trust you, but please, let's make sure this doesn't escalate." They spent the rest of the evening together, trying to push the unsettling events out of their minds. But the tension lingered, and it was clear that David still felt the weight of his actions. As they went to bed, both of them tried to find some peace, but it was a restless night. In the middle of the night, David awoke to pee. The room was dark, and the silence of the village was thick. He groggily reached for his phone to check the time, but the sound of something moving in the room froze him. His heart raced as he sat up in bed, listening intently. Then a chill ran down his spine as he saw something slithering in the darkness. The faint light from his phone illuminated the room just enough for him to make out the shape. A five-headed cobra, its hood spread wide, ready to strike. Amanda was lying there, completely unaware, sleeping peacefully just inches away from the snake. Panic surged through David. He didn't think, he acted. Grabbing the nearest thing to him, he hurled his lamp toward the snake, hoping the light and the noise would scare it away. But in his panic, the lamp hit the snake and shattered on the ground. To his horror, the lamp's flame caught on the snake's scales, and before he could react, the snake writhed in agony as the fire spread across its body. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, and the snake twisted and convulsed in pain, its many heads snapping and striking out in its final moments. David's heart was in his throat, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed a machete from the corner of the room, and with one swift motion, he severed the heads of the snake, ensuring it wouldn't harm Amanda or anyone else. The commotion was enough to rouse Amanda from her deep sleep. She bolted upright, her eyes wide with fear as she saw the smoke and the dead snake on the floor. "What? What's going on?" she gasped, her voice trembling. David, breathing heavily, wiped sweat from his brow. It was a snake, a cobra. It was about to strike you, Amanda. She looked at him in disbelief, her gaze moving from the snake to him. A cobra. That was a 5-headed cobra. What is going on here, David? David shook his head, still processing what had just happened. I don't know, Amanda. This isn't normal. I've never seen anything like it. His voice was shaky, his mind racing. He turned to Amanda, urgency in his tone. You need to leave, Amanda. Go report this to the NYSC Secretariat. Let them know what happened here. I'll stay back and speak with the elders, explain that I killed the snake in self-defense. But you need to get out of here and stay safe. Amanda hesitated, clearly torn. She looked at him, her eyes full of concern. David, no. I can't just leave you here. What if something else happens? What if you're in danger? David reached out and gently cupped her face. You have to go. You've seen what happened with the snake. The danger is real, and I can't risk you getting hurt. I'll be fine, I promise. Reluctantly, Amanda nodded. She gathered her things quickly, still glancing nervously at the snake's charred remains. Okay, but please, be careful. Call me as soon as you can. David kissed her forehead, his heart heavy with the weight of the situation. I will. Just make sure you stay safe. Don't come back until I know what's going on. With one last glance at him, Amanda hurried out the door, leaving David standing in the dimly lit room, his mind still in chaos. David took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He knew he needed to deal with this situation immediately, but he couldn't shake the sense of dread that had settled in his chest. Summoning all the courage he could muster, David walked to the village chief's house. Chief Okeke was a revered elder in the village, and David knew he had to speak with him if he had any hope of resolving the situation. When David arrived, Chief Okeke was deep asleep outside his compound when David's hurried footsteps woke him up. The old man looked up when David approached, his expression unreadable. Chief, I need to speak with you, David said, trying to keep his voice steady. Something has happened. I need your help. Chief Okeke's gaze hardened, almost as if he knew something had gone wrong. Speak, David, I am listening. David took a deep breath and led the chief to the scene. The two of them walked in tense silence, David's heart pounding in his chest. When they reached his lodge, he gestured toward the corner where the snake had been. The cold, lifeless body was still lying there, but something felt off, as if the air around it had shifted. You need to see this, David said, his voice tight with anxiety. Chief Okeke immediately stood up straighter and followed David into the room. As soon as the elder saw the snake's body, his face drained of color and he let out a blood-curdling scream. Abomination, he shouted, his voice full of horror. David's chest tightened and he rushed to explain. Chief, please, I didn't mean to. I was only protecting myself. I didn't know what it was. It was just a snake. But the chief, still in shock, didn't listen to him. His voice rang out again, louder this time, summoning the attention of the villagers. Abomination, this is an unforgivable crime. In a matter of seconds, the village began to stir. The murmurs of concern turned into shouts, and people gathered outside David's lodge, eager to witness what was unfolding. David watched in helpless dread as the villagers, mostly elders and women, stood at a distance, their faces twisted in anger and fear. It was then that the unimaginable happened. The lifeless snake on the floor began to change. David froze in place, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. The snake's body began to writhe, its form shifting and contorting. He watched in horror as its skin peeled away, scales vanishing, and before his very eyes, the snake transformed into a human figure. A lady. David gasped, his breath caught in his throat. It was then that he recognized her. Linda, his student. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling. No, it can't be. The villagers gasped in unison, and David heard a few of them mutter in disbelief, but his heart dropped when Chief Okeke spoke again. This is no ordinary woman. This is Linda, the daughter of the serpent goddess, the chief said with a heavy voice, his tone filled with grave sorrow. David's head spun. Linda, he whispered. But she was just a student. She was just... Before he could finish, one of the women from the crowd, her eyes filled with sorrow, stepped forward. That was no ordinary girl, she said, her voice trembling. She was the Serpent Queen's most beloved daughter. chosen from birth to serve as her heiress. The weight of those words hit David like a sledgehammer. His throat went dry and he felt his knees buckle. The realization of what he had just done slowly began to sink in, and the horror of the situation gripped him fully. Linda's body lay motionless, but the cold air around them was thick with an eerie energy. As the villagers continued to murmur and watch, Chief Okiki's face twisted in anguish. "You've killed her, David. You've killed the Serpent Queen's daughter," the chief said, his voice heavy with dread. "This is the worst kind of sacrilege. You've brought the wrath of the Serpent Goddess upon this village." David was overwhelmed with guilt, his thoughts crashing like waves in his mind. I did it in self-defense. She wanted to bite my girlfriend. He turned to the villagers, his voice breaking. "Please, you have to understand. She had been sending me letters. She tried to seduce me, but I didn't want anything to do with her. I thought it was just a childish crush. She threatened to deal with us, and now this happened." But the villagers were silent. The only sound was the steady wailing of the women mourning the death of Linda. The air was thick with tension, and the fear of what would come next was palpable. David felt a chill crawl up his spine, and Chief Okeke, who had been standing stoically, finally spoke again, his voice trembling with the weight of what had just been revealed. "David," he said, looking at him with a grim expression, "you have just brought ruin upon us all. The Serpent Goddess will not forgive this." David swallowed hard, his throat dry. "What can I do? How do I make this right? Please, I'll do anything." But Chief Okeke shook his head slowly. "There is nothing that can undo what you've done. You must be sacrificed to appease her, or we will all perish." The villagers grabbed him and took him to the shrine of the Serpent Goddess for her to pass judgment on him.